Hello, everyone. So a little Pearl Jam for those of us who didn't get to see them last night. Sorry, now you get to listen to us instead. But as the announcer said, I'm Whitney Fiore from ICF. I'm the Offshore Wind and Marine Lead for the West region, and I am here with this great group of panelists to talk about permitting. I think the title actually says AB 525, Permitting Roadmap. And I just want to preface this by saying, I think a lot of you probably heard the Go Big in California this morning, where they committed, where's Elizabeth Huber, to summer. So summer, we'll be getting the final. So there are some things we probably can't get into deeply while they're finishing that up and getting that out, but we found some really interesting parts of permitting to talk about in this. So I'm going to just quickly introduce my panelists here. We have Kate Huckelbridge, Executive Director of the California Coastal Commission. We have Scott Johnston, who is the Offshore Wind National Lead for Migratory Birds for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Jennifer Lucchesi is the Executive Officer for the California State Lands Commission. Silvia Yanez, who is the California State Permitting Director for Golden State Wind. And Rick Yarde is the Regional Environmental Director for the Bureau of, I think I got that wrong, Supervisor for the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM. So with that, I think we will get started. The first question that I have here, excuse me while I put my glasses on, is about the strategic plan. And as we all know, the last draft, it was the third, was issued in January of 24. The comment period is closed. They're working on comments. We do know that industry is looking for a little more specificity. They're looking for details on the MOU, timelines, the ocean REIT, those kinds of things. Can you give us any more details on the status of the permitting roadmap? And Kate, I'll put you in the hot seat.
No, not really. So I think you've all, I'm sure, seen the draft. We are incredibly busy getting through comments, coordinating on responses, making sure everybody's on the same page with the final version when it will come out and be ready to be adopted later this summer. So I think while we don't have more details now, I think it's also fair to say that we are continuing to coordinate. We are doing all the things that I think we talk about in the roadmap currently. So I know we can get into that later, but no more no more details now. I think we need to wait for the adoption of the strategic plan.
Okay, and Jennifer, I'm going to turn it to you since you guys are partners in crime.
Yes.
So
I would just add that I think what you're seeing here and why we can't give a lot of details at this moment in time is because we are coordinating and collaborating, and we're endeavoring to speak with one state voice. And so because we can't give details now doesn't mean we're not doing a ton of work in the background. And really our goal is through the strategic plan that all of us state agencies that are dedicated to seeing offshore wind in California successful, that we're working behind the scenes so that we can speak with one voice to provide that kind of certainty of process as we move forward.
Great. Rick, do you care to join in the conversation? Because, AB 525 permitting roadmap requires request coordination with the federal and the state permitting, and I think industry is looking for, that coordination. So I would ask you the same question.
Yeah, echoing Kate, I think I would emphasize we're working together closely right now, and we're going to continue to do that. I think the roadmap's going to formalize. I know you've all read the draft plan, but you'll recall that there's going to be that model from the desert plan with the action team. There's going to be this policy group, the sort of the senior leaders working on policy. Those things are going to ensure that we keep considering working together on joint documents, for example. So looking forward to that. I also want to say that I think one of the great potentials of the whole plan is the sea space. I just can't emphasize enough how important I think it is personally that, the state has put out this draft sea space to signal what it's considering for the future. And as you know, BOEM's going to need to do the same thing as it goes into round 2. And to have the ideas of both entities represented in the public forum, I think is can't emphasize enough how helpful I think that's going to be. So.
Well, we know a lot of work has gone into particularly that aspect of both the state and INCOAS as part of BOEM's process have really tried to look at sea space. Scott?
Yeah, well, not too much of a comment specifically on the plan coming out, but we've heard a lot today from the other panels about what we can learn from the East Coast, and having worked on the East Coast for 20 years or so, have definitely been in the midst of a lot of that, and a lot can definitely be learned. And I think for me, when I think about permitting, I think of the information that's really needed to go into the permitting to be able to evaluate what the effects may be. And I just want to kind of do a shout out to BOEM, frankly, over the last couple of decades. The Fish and Wildlife Service and BOEM have been working together to fill that gap of information along the East Coast, at least for migratory birds. And I know that it's also happening with NOAA, but they really dedicated themselves to fulfill that information, or fill that information gap, so we have the material to be able to evaluate during the permit process. So I'm hoping that sort of informs the process along the West Coast as well.
I think we're talking about data-driven permitting. Sylvia?
Yeah, I think to complement what my fellow panelists have been saying, it's the industry certainly recognizes all the progress that have been made at state and federal level in putting together a robust strategic plan, making sure there's a commitment for moving forward. I think there's a lot that has been accomplished to date, but we also need some certainty in the implementation, and how the state will anchor to the BOEM process, how the Ocean Renewable Action Team will work in the next few years, how we will work to have that GPS that will guide the industry to develop the project safely, with that sense of urgency, but safely at the same time. We need that certainty and that predictability that we need out of the roadmap. So we're looking forward to see the final version coming out. Also, the memorandum of understanding and the next steps and implementation.
Yes, I think I can say with certainty we're all looking forward to the final roadmap being issued. Well, strategic plan, actually. So next question. Many of the projects, the California projects, all of them, I would say, are proceeding with agency coordination, even absent the permitting roadmap. There's a lot that's been happening. I'm hoping that maybe we can discuss what things are progressing, what successes have you achieved, what kinds of milestones have you reached, again, maybe not in an official sense, but, and I ended with you, Silvia, I'm gonna start with you on this question.
Sure. Yeah, I think we're almost a year old from our leases, started last June 1st, and it's been a great experience in terms of collaboration in putting together robust communication plans. I would say that's one of the first milestones that we have accomplished, not only as part of our lease obligations, but as our focus on relationship building with agencies, with fisheries, communities, and with the tribal members. So we have been putting a lot of effort, working together among leaseholders, working with agencies, state, federal, local level, and the fishing working group being part of that effort with the state, and having a very important effort in reaching out to tribal nations and in all the tribal community to have their input ahead of time. So I think that's something that I would put out as one of the first accomplishments or successes of this time. In terms of, even though we don't have a roadmap and each developer has a different approach for surveys, we have been relying on this early and often and robust communication plans to put things together and engage the agencies early on, get feedback on our plans, and make sure we continue with development while the roadmap is ready.
Great. Jennifer, I'll turn to you next.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the successes and progress that we've made is we've built on kind of going back to the idea of the ocean REIT. A lot of those coordination and collaboration opportunities have been further implemented and progressing on all levels, from our scientists meeting every 2 weeks to look at environmental studies to, and what's needed in the future, to tribal working groups, to the directors of all the permitting agencies meeting every 2 weeks to talk about progress and what steps need to happen to continue to move forward, to the fishing group, working group that Kate will speak to. So a lot of progress has been made in terms of walking the walk in terms of collaboration and coordination. I will also say, I think and this was referenced in the morning discussion, the ports and harbor districts have really started to step up and are making significant progress to, especially on the staging and integration site development, make significant steps moving forward on that front, and we are excited to work with them towards that and look forward to that continuing.
Yeah, well, that's great news. I'm sure this audience likes to hear that there's movement on the ports. Kate?
Sure, I'll just build on what Jennifer said. I think, what we have to go on here is a really great foundation that we built over many years amongst agencies and stakeholders, and I think to Jennifer's point, we've seen a lot of progress kind of continuing that and watching that. Those relationships that have been built kind of now, they're providing some fruit here and figuring out how we're going to work together. I think for us, just a very good example of that has been our review of survey plans. We're starting to see survey plans from some of the lessees. We've been working very closely with BOEM. We have a process to ensure that we're reviewing the plans consistent with our consistency determination and our agreements under that. We've been pulling in other state agencies, coordinating with state lands to look at their program and make sure surveys are consistent with that. So it's just an example, I think, of how we're kind of seeing that all come to fruition. And if we didn't have that baseline relationship, I think it would take a lot longer. But I think we're moving relatively quick.
No, and it is nice to see that the survey plans are, being approved and surveys are underway, or so the rumor has it. So, it's Scott.
Yeah, well, being fairly new into this job, maybe, 7 months or something like that, having worked for 20 some odd years in the Northeast, in the East, I know a lot of the partners, I know the processes, but now expanding into purview over Gulf of Mexico and now on the West Coast as well, which, by the way, I do have California street cred. I grew up in Fresno. I went to Humboldt State when it was Humboldt State and UCLA. So, I'm of you, okay?
You can stay.
You can stay on stage. We weren't going to make you leave, okay?
But what I do find really interesting is that the projects on the East Coast are all more or less staggered, pretty much at different sort of timelines. But I think what's really intriguing here in California, especially, and Oregon is not too far behind, is all the projects are more or less on the same timeline. So I think that provides a really unique opportunity. And again, how the developers maybe could work together with all the various partners, I think is a very, very unique opportunity. So definitely look forward to working off of common goals and common priorities and such.
Rick?
Yeah, I think first I'll mention the programmatic EIS. I think you're all probably familiar with that, but we are thick in the process of completing a programmatic EIS for the existing 5 leases in California. It's following the model of the New York Bight programmatic, if you're familiar with that. Just as a quick recap, we are working towards a draft right now. We've finished scoping on that. In the end, that's going to provide what I think of as best practices for BOEM to recommend for the leaseholders to either incorporate into their COPs, or they may be ultimately conditions of approval on COPs, to just get a head start on minimizing or avoiding potential impacts from development and operations. So that's one. I'll say about the process overall, I think it's been really exciting to just see how the implementation of some of the early thinking about the leases and some of the stipulations that were really pretty novel about communications plans, for example, and about how the survey plans are coming together. I think it's a lot of work. I think that we are all learning together, and that's we, the leaseholders, and the public, the interested and affected public that's being engaged, and the regulatory agencies, all of us just learning a lot together about how this all comes together, how we work together really effectively, and I think there's a lot of potential for the future. I think it's going to continue to get better as we move on.
No, I think that's a really good point. I recall when I moved back to California in January 21 and I said offshore wind and most people were like, offshore what? But they had no idea what it was. So I do think that the learning curve has been steep, but it's been a steady uphill, a steady climb in, I think, understanding. I do have a follow-on question to you. When can we expect that draft PEIS to be on the street?
Later this year. I don't have a specific month, but we have not guidelines anymore, but requirements in the new law of NEPA to finish processes on EISs within 2 years. So you'll know we initiated late last year, so we'll be done late next year. So somewhere in the middle of there, I think we will have a draft out later this year.
Okay, positively, no commitment.
I will not be wrong.
Yeah, there you go.
It will be out probably later this year.
All right, so why don't we discuss some challenges? Because obviously there are challenges that need to be overcome, and I'm curious as to what kinds of things you've encountered, particularly in California, or that you're seeing in California, and what are some of the ways that you're meeting that challenge? And I'm going to go to you first, Scott.
Oh, sure. Well, I think trying to really understand what the priority species and that you really want to work on that's been a challenge on the East Coast, certainly. Even though I mentioned that we have a long-term relationship with BOEM and other folks trying to collect that information and fill those data gaps, we've actually been really surprised by some of the species that are coming out, at least based on our modeling for collision risk. And one of those that's coming out to be one of the ones probably at most risk is a species that spends about 25% of its time in the U.S. And the rest of the time they're breeding up in the Arctic. It's a red knot, by the way. It's a migrating shorebird. Stops over in the U.S. for literally a matter of weeks every year, and then winters down in Argentina. So having that, a migrating shorebird, as the one that we're in some ways sort of most concerned about, I think really opens up the discussion along the West Coast, where thus far I think a lot of the priority has gone, natural priority, frankly, are to the seabird community that's out in the environment. So petrels and shearwaters and other species like that, gulls too, for that matter. But it does bring up the issue of looking at these other species, such as migrating shorebirds, and then also land birds we're finding out in the offshore environment along the East Coast. And also, we were talking about bats earlier as well, which is really, really surprising. And they're following insects.
Right.
That's the other thing that's really surprising for a lot of us that work in the offshore environment, that there's a huge community of insects out there. And so the birds and bats are out there hunting on that. So I think that sort of really being open to a variety of different species that may be affected. And that's, by the way, I mentioned collision risk, but also displacement is another real issue that's going to have potential long-term effects that will take a while to figure out.
And so meeting that challenge by trying to take data from the East Coast and the West Coast and interpolate the potential effects.
Well, yeah, it's really doing the work, bringing partners together to really try to understand what the effects might be. And also one thing that that's really benefited us on the East Coast is doing tracking work. So the traditional way, at least of trying to understand distribution of seabirds, is to go out on boats or go do aerial surveys. There's limitations to that. There's weather. It's only during daytime. But using satellite telemetry or radio telemetry and other methods like that, thermal cameras, for example, you can get much, much better information on birds that are active and bats that are active. I don't know why I keep turning to you every time I talk about bats. So really being able to track then movements at nighttime and also in bad weather, which is when a lot of birds actually will migrate too. They'll come further down along the ocean. But yeah, those are the things that we're dealing with, trying to introduce those new techniques.
No, I think that's great. speaking to our roosters down there, as in bat roosters, and we'll go to Silvia next.
Actually, have been learning about bats
Oh, good.
because we're incorporating detectors in our survey plans.
Yeah.
So it's been an interesting learning experience for me as well. I think I will divide up the challenges or kind of the areas that we're working on right now. It's in three parts. One, the first, like in the overall scheme of project development, challenge of aligning permitting with ports and transmission. That's certainly an issue for the industry in general in California. And procurement, there's certainly a big step after AB 1373, but now how that would move forward, still something to be seen, and we expect to see progress. That's on the development side. On the permitting side, we have seen in the past year differences in approaches between East Coast and West Coast for federal agencies, and trying to kind of have that conversation, bringing our expertise. Many of the developers have experience in the East Coast, and how we kind of face that challenge of seeing a different approach in the West Coast, and talking and making sure we progress and coming to agreement in the approach for California. That's been something we have been working on. Also seeing the interagency dynamics. There's a lot of, I think in a previous panel, it was mentioned it's many meetings, like bi-weekly, monthly meetings in interagency, federal, state, but there's still some gaps in information and how the MOD rule will come into place, or how the state will work with federal. There are things that are still being worked through, and we're kind of going along with that challenge of understanding and being a partner with the agencies. And in terms of the public facing, I think one of the challenges we have been facing is understanding the timeline. I think for many communities, they think we have a project already developed, and we're just doing an EIR, and we're at a very early stage. So providing that approach of being a good neighbor and providing a early and often engagement, but also not having a project design yet, can be a challenge. So how to communicate that and have certainty and provide understanding of how long these projects take to be developed. That's something we're working through. Communications and making sure we establish those relationships for many years.
No, I mean, I think that's great. One of the things that I hear often, I'm sure others on the programmatic EIS, you're going to analyze all the projects, right? Right, Rick?
Well, yeah, I mean, so there have been a lot of requests for programmatic EIS, and when people ask for that, they don't mean the same thing. People have different expectations about what kind of analysis that would provide for them. So that's been one of the challenges, of course, to try to make sure that we're setting expectations about the outcomes of that process and what to expect from it. So certainly that, I would say that we certainly do learn from the Atlantic processes going on and what they've been through, since they are quite a few years ahead in some of their projects, right? And Silvia mentioned, I mean, some expectations can be set there, and the reality may be different on the West Coast, for good reasons too, in some cases, sometimes just culturally, but sometimes, you have to acknowledge that we have a different sort of environmental setting, and we have a different group of interested and affected people. So certainly differences there, but there are also just things as simple as, for example, on the Atlantic, they have shallow water and they pile drive their projects a lot. And that experience has come to the West Coast, and people ask a lot of questions about it on offshore wind here, and it's just not going to be the same. We have deeper water, we have floating, we expect floating structures. So just managing that conversation is one of the things we have to constantly work on. So,
Thank you. Kate?
No, I think it's interesting to hear everybody talk about sort of early implementation challenges, setting or managing expectations, and I think that's where we all are in this journey, and we're navigating it in different ways. I think for the Coastal Commission, we've been very focused on the fishing working group and sort of managing some of those similar challenges in that context of you know, we're early in the process. We're working hard on getting a strategy pulled together, and managing different expectations from, you know, what a statewide strategy is and how that's going to address concerns of local fishing groups and of even individual fishermen in some cases, and how, you know, how that's all kind of manifesting, I think, has been a challenge, but also an early success. And then I think we are focused and keeping, you know, the group is really working towards a common goal, and we've built this good structure around the group, and it's now we just have to be patient and let the process work out, which is not an easy thing to do in this space. Y'all are not very patient people. Just kidding. But no, we're all very anxious to get some of the work done. And so I think that's part of where, you know, some of these early challenges are, like wanting to be farther than we are, and yet letting the process unfold and setting the expectations for what we can deliver on what time frames and what that process looks like.
So again, the devil's in the details, right? The devil's in the details of the projects, the devil's in the details of the permitting roadmap, you know, so I'll turn it to you, Jennifer, to maybe talk about some of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to tee off on some of what my colleagues up here have said, is the communication side is very challenging, just in terms of we hear we're not moving fast enough, we're moving too slow, and managing that, as Kate was saying, in the space of developing trust and relationships and letting the process play out is critically important at this point. In terms of the details, as the CEQA lead agency for the state, some of the things that we're identifying early now as challenges is when ensuring that when we embark on the CEQA process, that all the 5 lessees are contributing equitably to the environmental analysis and the studies and that sort of thing. So one company who might be out in first isn't bearing all the burden of that initial EIR. The other thing is just in terms moving back to the permitting side of things and the ocean REIT is ensuring that when we set that up, we're setting it up in a way that we're also memorializing decisions and paths forward. This was something we were involved in the DRECP, the Desert REIT, many years ago, and that was something that we are learning from to understand that there were decisions made, but then we moved on to something else. It wasn't memorialized, and we were rehashing things, not because there was new science or new information, but because we weren't sure what we had decided on previously. So memorializing that so we're as efficient and consistent across the board as possible. And then finally, it's to Scott's point about doing something, analyzing something so new offshore in the space of CEQA that hasn't been done in California. Making sure that we're using the right proxies throughout the world and on the East Coast, but then dealing with the uniqueness of offshore California and making sure there's trust in that interpolation and that analysis, because we don't know everything at this point, and that's where adaptive management and monitoring comes in so strongly.
Yes, the unknowns are probably. Again, the thing that is going to be most challenging throughout this process. So we're going to change track just a little bit. And one of the things that, while it's not specific to permitting as a challenge or something that we're dealing with a lot in the offshore wind industry and field, but misinformation has definitely presented challenges on the East Coast, and we're seeing it here on the West Coast. I live in Los Osos, and I read it every day in our local paper. So I wanted to see if this group might talk about misinformation that you're having to address, and what are the solutions. And I'm going to start with you, Jen, just because you've just finished.
So right now, just currently what we're challenged with, some of it's misinformation, some of it's just opportunities for more engagement and education, is in the offshore geophysical permitting, geophysical survey permitting space. What BOEM is going through in federal waters and how that interacts with the state and state waters. The State Lands Commission, just as background, we have jurisdiction to issue geophysical permits offshore California and state waters. And there is a lot of necessary education and combating some misconceptions about our permitting program, BOEM's permitting program, how they interact, and also what the State Lands Commission is permitting in terms of surveys. Our program is one that was really developed robustly in 2013. We have a mitigated neg deck that covers the entirety of our program for low energy geophysical surveys offshore California. In the last 10 years, we've issued about 250 geophysical survey permits, with one being more controversial, but out of 250. These are surveys that permits that we issue pretty regularly under our program, and our program is really founded on really solid science. It's anchored in a lot of different conditions that protect the environment, the marine environment, and also reduce conflict between ocean users, and also anchored in transparency in terms of public noticing of when these surveys are going to occur, and then post-survey analysis to ensure that they did comply with our permit conditions. And I think there is some misconception out there that it's the Wild West with the offshore geophysical survey permitting and survey work out there, and we just look forward to any opportunity we have to talk about what's actually happening in state waters.
Right, I think there's a misconception that seismic surveys are occurring, and
that is not happening.
There you go.
That is not permitted under our program, and that would require significant CEQA analysis and a very long-range application process.
Rick, maybe to get some federal perspective on misinformation.
Yeah, agreeing with all of that. Thank you, Jennifer. I think that that example in particular is great to consider because the concept is difficult. Sound, the impacts of sound in the ocean are very difficult to understand, to describe, to write about. Communication is key. We use the opportunities that we have to try to get out there, respond to questions that we hear, to provide the analyses that are needed. And I'll say the other thing that we have on the BOEM side is our environmental studies program, which allows us to focus on specific questions that are important to our decision making that could be related to anything, but including sound in the ocean. So we're constantly trying to produce opportunities for some new science to take place to help answer some of those questions. But again, I think it just comes down to doing the job of being out there and talking to people and responding to questions, and just keep doing that thing that we need to do, which is the information gathering and the analysis and engagement that's important to the process.
Scott, do you have anything to add to that
Well,
aspect?
as far as misinformation goes, I mean, it's honestly been remarkable, and I'm sure many people have read the headlines about some of the misinformation regarding whale strikes along the East Coast, and there being zero evidence that it's connected to any construction with wind development. So that's been remarkable, and I think one of those things that maybe will never go away, frankly. I haven't necessarily seen that on the bird or bat side, even though I think that a lot of people are concerned that turbines could, kill a lot of birds potentially. But that's exactly why we do the pre and post construction monitoring. That's why Europe has been doing that same sort of work for years and years to try to understand what the impacts are. And so, but as far as actual misinformation, I haven't really seen that per se with birds or bats.
Well, that's good news then, right?
It is, yeah. Hopefully, I didn't just start now a campaign for misinformation.
You said kill birds. I heard it.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Kate.
I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, the Coastal Commission has a role both in federal and state waters, so we provide a little bit of the connective tissue, and I think are experiencing some of the same, both confusion and misinformation. And I think I think the reality too is we do have some new stakeholders, right? We have although we may have been in this space for a while and feel pretty comfortable in it, we do have some new folks that are beginning to see what's happening and are being curious and wanting to be part of the process, and don't have the background that many of us do. And so just to put a point on the need for more education and communication, both about what is being proposed, what the process is, where they can get engaged, has been really important. It's not going to solve all the problems, but I think it's an important thing to note is that, you know, we do have an obligation, I think, as state and federal agencies, at least to, you know, to provide that forum for discussion, and to provide the best information we can to the public. So we're really seeking to do that, and creating a space where we can talk about facts and walk through process and provide some comfort to some, that they're, you know, that we are paying close attention, and that they're welcome to, you know, provide comments and participate in the process.
So I just want to remind the audience that you can submit questions on your Bizbo app. There are a couple of questions that have been submitted. I have one more in my little note cards here that I thought we might do that one quickly, and then I'll turn to audience questions. So each of you get like 20 or 30 seconds or less, right? Where do you see offshore wind permitting a year from now? Rick, you go.
Well, I see it on the BOEM side where we are now, which is, you know, the job that we have fundamentally doesn't change much. It's what I said before, the information gathering, the analysis, and the engagement to move the process forward. But what we do all the time is we innovate. You heard some about that earlier on the other panels about how we added, for example, the draft WIA comment period in Oregon. We innovate based on what we hear from our engagement opportunities about what makes the process better. So I think we're going to continue innovating, but fundamentally meeting that same standard that we always do.
Sylvia?
Yeah, I think a year from now, we're looking forward to see what the draft PEIS brings, especially with the avoidance, minimization, mitigation measures. I think there's a lot of lessons learned from the New York-wide PEIS that we want to see how it plays in California, and making sure those measures are feasible and implementable in the state. We're also looking forward to see how the Ocean Renewable Action Team gets together, and we have, you know, an implementation in place for the strategic plan. I think that will be our expectation. Hopefully we have an MOU signed by, you know, next year this time. But I think it would be a clear sign that we're progressing and making this happen.
Jennifer?
So in addition to the ongoing collaboration and coordination that we will continue to do on the state side, I'm really looking forward to making significant progress on the port infrastructure improvements permitting, primarily at the Port of Long Beach and up in Humboldt, seeing that make significant progress moving forward, and incorporating engagement with our environmental justice communities and our tribal partners. And in addition to that, also understanding better and making some decisions about how we might tier off the BOEM programmatic EIS to help jumpstart our environmental review.
Great. Scott?
Yeah, my comment actually is the same as Jennifer's as far as port development goes, because I know when I've been thinking about port development, which does relate to transmission too, that we've heard about earlier, is looking at the development of a place like Humboldt Bay or Morro Bay, or even up in Oregon like Coos Bay or Newport. Those are really big. That's a big change compared to, say, upgrading New Bedford or upgrading the Bronx or something like that, right? Where, you know, there's already a ton of infrastructure there. So I think looking at that port development and the potential environmental effects will be one big deal. And then one other quick comment in like 5 seconds is I was glad the Assemblywoman earlier talked about the regional wildlife science entity that she had proposed. And so I've been talking to as many people as I can, and I know a lot of people in the audience have talked about that, trying to develop that collaborative for the West Coast. It was a huge deal, I think, for the East Coast partners to really be able to collaborate well.
No, I think that's a really good point, and thank you for making that. Kate?
I was going to make very much the same point. That's one of the pieces of progress I'd like to see or hope to see is sort of further development of environmental monitoring and adaptive management program structure, more specificity around what that looks like and how it unrolls. And then just also on the fishing working group, I think we'll have some real progress next year towards a statewide strategy, ideally a timeline for what it looks like to finalize and adopt that. We'll see if we can get that far by next year, but I think we'll be close.
Okay. So turning to the audience questions, the first one is between leasing and submission of the COP, there aren't formal opportunities for the public to engage with the developer or project design elements and monitoring and mitigation requirements. As the period when most project decisions are made, how can developers and stakeholders better collaborate? I'm going to start with you, Rick, if you don't mind, just because you're the formal opportunity maker for a lot of the engagement.
Yeah, well, I will say that I hope the programmatic EIS provides one of those opportunities to talk about those issues, mitigation in particular, in concept. I mean, we are at a hypothetical stage without COPs in yet, but I think that is one opportunity. And I think there could be more, just depending on the setting based on what subject matter you're interested in. We've been talking about the 7C process, which may not directly influence the project design, but I mean, it's an opportunity to talk about projects ultimately, maybe. But I mean,
Can I add
yes.
something? I think even though there's not a formal opportunity or formal consultation as part of this early phase, we still have these communication plans in place to cover for that gap, to cover for having that opportunity for engagement. And I think that's why we spent a lot of effort in putting these robust plans together. So we offer the opportunities. The part of the NOI checklist is to ensure that all developers have enough opportunities, have offered opportunities for engagement before the COP is even prepared.
And Silvia, is Golden State already undertaking, you've already taken advantage of some of those opportunities or made those opportunities happen, correct?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. So again, living in that community, I know these things. Does anyone else want to add to this, or I can move on to the next question?
I would just add briefly that I think there's, the PIS is a sort of formalized opportunity. The state itself also has many other opportunities for engagement. It's not maybe directly on a particular project per se, but on the general, some of the general issues. I mean, I think at least the commission is sort of, this is a regular topic of conversation at our commission hearings and public comment, and we do updates periodically. So those are opportunities for engagement, and I imagine there will be more probably informal type opportunities into the future.
Well, I think part of this goes back to, Silvia, you were saying earlier, project designs are not, there isn't a project right now. I mean, technically there is no project, right? So there is not a lot to show the public.
What we're asking for that input in order to design a better project.
It is the other way around, in other words, yes.
Exactly.
So, the next question has to do with the PEIS also, Rick, so not to put you on the spot, but it presents opportunities to create efficiencies for the COP NEPA reviews. The New York Bite draft PEIS was published and received many comments. I know there are lessons learned, and this commenter would like to ask you, what lessons learned are there between New York Bite PEIS and California?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question, and this might be a little unsatisfactory, but the process is playing out. It's a little early to say what ultimately all the lessons might be, but I will say we're in constant communication about how that process is playing out on the Atlantic, and how our corollary process out here is playing out. I had a meeting earlier today, in fact, listening to some of their discussion about their addressing the comments that they got. So I can say they're both still in progress. We are coordinated. We're going to, of course, be looking for opportunities to learn from what's happening over there. But I'll also say again, we're different here, so we're going to be the same. What I say internally, we will be consistent to the extent that's appropriate, but there are going to be differences. There just needs to be. So.
And I think that's totally fair. Silvia, I'm going to ask you because I know your team has a lease area in both places, right? So are there any lessons learned from your review of the New York Bite draft?
Certainly, yeah. We spent, many hours going through the New York Bite PEIS and making sure we had like a robust comment letter. From the industry perspective, I think we kind of share the need for understanding regional effects and cumulative impacts, but I think our concern is making sure those avoidance, mitigation, minimization measures are, consistent with what the technology can be, what is available right now, what can be feasible and implementable. In some cases, there are parts where it can be, others not necessarily. So I think that's where the industry has been putting a lot of effort in providing comments, and we hope that the California PEIS kind of incorporates that feedback in an early stage, so the measures come out with something that
Right.
that are more adaptable here.
So you're not required to do something that either A, has no effect or can't be technologically implemented.
Right.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, I think we are at time, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Before we thank our panelists, I did want to mention that we're going to take a 15-minute break, and then Edion is going to do a keynote at 2:45, so everyone should come back for that. But I really do want to thank these wonderful panelists who I know are working so hard at, forwarding offshore wind, whether it be permitting, project, what have you, here in California. So thank you so much, you guys. Really a big hand for these guys.